All right, so a couple people might keep showing up as the meeting goes on while they'll be let in. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and let our wonderful choral representative, Sarah, introduce our clinician for the evening.
Hello, guys. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to have my former community college choir director and also my former voice instructor, Dr. Miskell, lead us in a clinic today. She's going to be telling us about rehearsal structure and how to schedule rehearsals, and I'm super excited for it. And I'm thankful for everyone for being here as well.
Is that my cue? Yay. Cool. Hi guys. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Sarah and everybody that's here. I think probably one of the best things I've gotten in my career is to just allow yourself to benefit from working with other people. And so a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is stuff that I've gotten from other people that I've worked with in my time. And there's nobody that really wins at all this stuff, so we should be sharing it with everybody. So you can take it for what it's worth. You can decide that you don't like any of this. You can take some of it, you can take none of it. But I'm just going to show you or share with you kind of a little bit of how I was taught to structure rehearsals and look at the game plan for an effective choral rehearsal, which could really be any rehearsal, as well as some of the intricacies within the rehearsal, specific parts of it and whatnot too. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to either jump in and stop me or like jot some stuff down for the end. I kind of am combining a couple different presentations I've done in the past. So I may share my screen and do a bit of a slideshow if possible. Do I have the ability to do that? Yeah, I think I do. Cool.
Yeah, you should have the ability to share your screen.
Yeah, awesome. I'll do that in a bit. Not do that right now. Cool. Awesome. So I'm going to start a little bit with kind of the concept of the choral rehearsal in general. 90 probably 95% of the time, most of us are we are going to be the only vocal instruction that our students get within the classroom. A lot of times you're not going to have students that are taking private lessons outside of a class or that are already professionals in their way. So the choral rehearsal in particular kind of has to dub as a mini voice lesson for all of your students, because otherwise they're not going to get any of that kind of specific vocal pedagogy instruction. Now, I don't think that that means we have to get into the nitty gritty, because a lot of times that kind of it's too much information for students. It's too much, just whether it's science or otherwise. Most people just want to sing, right? But we have to be able to help them through that with pedagogy to get our desired result as best as possible with keeping our singers healthy and whatnot in the meantime. So I'm going to talk a little bit about first the choral rehearsal as a voice lesson. And then I'm going to talk about structure, and looking at various parts of the rehearsal and sort of how you just look at your overall, whether it's a year or a semester structure. Not all of this is really rocket science, to be honest with you, but it is something to think about. And I know for me, having, even if it's a loosely followed structure, helps me plan rehearsals quickly, because usually we don't have the kind of prep time we want, and you have to sort of keep moving no matter where you're at in terms of your own stress levels. And having a little bit of a structure to plug stuff into can help, especially in busy times. So like I mentioned, the choral rehearsal is really like a voice lesson for most of us, because most of our singers are not going to have that outside instruction, private lessons wise. So it's important that when you're thinking about your rehearsals and the instruction that you give, that you're giving specific things for them to attain. Not simply saying things like, oh, altos, that's flat, or, oh, that's just, those are just wrong notes. You need to fix that. A lot of times we have to go into more detail with that. So how do you fix something that is flat? How do you fix something that is it singing in tune or ringing in tune, whether that be the production that they're using or the balance of voices in a chordal structure? But it's important for you to think as a singer yourself, how you physically would correct that to then give that instruction to your students, not just telling them what's wrong, but giving them quick and easy feedback. Maybe not everything all at once, but little bits and pieces to build from, to give them attainable small steps that together add up to the bigger picture. Um, in terms of let's see, I lost my place in my notes. In terms of that rehearsal, making sure that within all elements of the rehearsal that you're constantly reinforcing that excellent technique and that's healthy for you, whether it be posture and alignment, proper breath support, certain placement ideas that make it easier and more free produced sound. It's important that you've looked at those things within the music that you're doing, or at least can identify it quicker. And truthfully, if you're not sure what you're hearing, pick something and address it and try and go from there. So I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the rehearsal at the micro level. But before I get that there, I want to talk about the macro level. It's important that not only are you structuring your day-to-day rehearsals, but you really want to think about the overall trajectory of what a season or a cycle might be. It could be a semester or a year. I know when I was teaching middle school and high school, really the center of the year was our festival performances that we had to do for the district where the students would go and get a rating. And so that was the repertoire that I would choose first and then backtrack from there, determine what kind of main concepts and struggles and challenges they were going to have in that festival music, and then choose appropriate repertoire for, I think our festivals were always in the spring. I would choose appropriate music repertoire to teach the desired skills in the fall and in the holiday season, to get them to where I wanted them to be come April or March, depending on how early the festivals were. And that's not a perfect practice, but if there's something that's in a specific language or that's super rhythmic or has different meter changes, maybe you are going to build up to that with what you choose to teach in the fall. And it's important that you always remember your number one teaching tool is your repertoire. Repertoire choice is so important for the just success of your students, but then also the ability to get them to grow and to try different things. So I really want to encourage that you are thinking at the big level first, and then your individual rehearsals that lead you to where you want to take your group over the course of, I mean, at BBC right now, it's 16-week semesters. But even then, I still am planning for what we want to do in the spring and trying to build skill, just readiness by the time you get to whatever your main attraction is that year. So within the individual rehearsal itself, I think there are we're going to talk about two main real components that I was taught. One, of course, is the warm up part of the rehearsal, and that's the PowerPoint that I have that I'll share here in a bit, that we'll go through. But the other thing is the overall structure of the rehearsal. And there is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, maybe you are, but there is the concept of the golden mean ratio in a rehearsal. I don't know if you guys have ever talked about that before or you've heard about that in your classes, but there's a lot of there's science behind it, and I'm not going to get into that today, but essentially the golden mean refers to a place in the rehearsal where, or a ratio of time where things are the most productive. And so essentially what that golden mean ratio is about 2/3 of the way through your rehearsal. That's when you have fully warmed up your singers or your musicians in there. They are mentally engaged, they've already done some work, and they're ready to get to the nitty gritty of some really big nuts and bolts of what you're going for in your repertoire. And that usually happens about 2/3 of the way through. So if you're looking at an hour rehearsal, you want your whether it's really difficult music or a specific skill that you're really wanting to hone in on, that's going to go about 40 minutes into an hour rehearsal. And that can really help you structure leading into that, perhaps starting with something that is more easily accessible at first to get into the rehearsal, so that you're not trying to dive in headfirst right away. You're easing them into things that they've done in previous rehearsals, reinforcing whether it's articulations, language skills, working your way into some of those more difficult parts of the music, whether it be harmonically, meter wise, all of that, and then moving away from that super hard stuff to let them finish with something that is successful, enjoyable, and lets them leave the room on a high as well. I think that's really important because we want to engage our students at the beginning of the rehearsal in a way that is well, engaging is the word that's coming to mind right now. Sorry, it's a Friday afternoon for me too. Words are hard sometimes, but grabbing your students, getting them motivated and engaged, doing some really hard work, and maybe getting frustrated in that middle part, but then also bringing them back to being successful at something that lets them leave the room in that state of euphoria, like, yeah, this was great, this was cool. Not everything has to be super exciting all the time, but it can leave people with that feeling of success to make them want to come back and do more, right? I think that's really important, that you're setting that up for your students to always want to continue to grow and to get better. So that golden mean concept for me has really just helped me have a go-to structure for rehearsals when in doubt. Okay, what's the hardest thing that we're doing right now, or what's the thing that they're struggling with the most? Let me put that in about 2/3 of the way through. I can get to that point. Maybe I'll have them, review something or just do some rhythms on certain things leading up to that, and then give them something that they can succeed on the way out. Again, none of it's none of it's fail proof or fail safe, but it gives a little bit of a structure so that you can get as much out of a rehearsal as possible, regardless of what the circumstances are. And like I said, there is a lot of science behind the golden mean ratio, but I'll leave that for another time when we can go into the science stuff behind it. So anyway, I want to look a little bit at vocal warm-ups too, because I think that's really important. And I should say vocal or choral warm-ups. So now I'm going to share my screen if that's cool. Let me go. Wait. Pull this up first, and then share screen. Okay, I'll get this into a slideshow. Everybody see everything okay? I hope. Cool. Okay. So, the thing to think about first, and this is for your own, thought process, but what are warm-ups? And is there a difference between choral warm-ups and vocal warm-ups? That's for you to decide and ask yourself. So I think that there are definitely elements of both that are similar, um, but they tend to take different approaches whether you're working as a soloist or as an ensemble singer or player. And there are little tweaks and parts of both that you want to include, but there's nuance to all of it based on your circumstances. So these things that I'm about to talk about are, again, things that it was taught to me by somebody else. And I have found success with using these concepts and this structure over my whole career. Not always, again, following it to a T, but it gave me somewhere to start from when most of the time you're in a public school system, your day is spent running from one thing to the next. And so having that solid quiet time to sit down and really prepare for rehearsal sometimes does not happen, as much as we'd like to think it would. But so having this little structure has helped me kind of just be able to plug in as much as I can and keep it moving, for lack of a better term. Okay, so a general formula for warm up that I have stuck with is starting with something that is physically engaging, getting students blood flowing, whether it be just simple rhythmic type things, but getting them physically engaged tends to up your energy level. It gets the breath involved, whether they're thinking about breathing or not. It's that kind of physical energy that any of us know is required in being a fantastic musician. That kind of emotional engagement takes a lot of physical energy as well. The second moving towards is mental engagement. Physical doesn't take, the thought process, but mentally engaging, watching cues, doing the follow me exercises that we've done, everything from rhythm cannons to do what I do and follow, and doing group follow so that you're starting to get them honed in mentally. You start with the big muscles, physically engage, and then try to bring the mind into what needs to be approached for the day. And so sometimes with the mentally engaging things, it could be something that incorporates text from the music as well. Maybe it's pronunciation, maybe it's words, or maybe it is just some of the non-verbal cues that we use in ensemble collaboration. After that, I would always I try to move to breath. So engaging the breath in a way that is more beneficial for that breath support you need for singing, engaging both that feeling of release for the inhale and then contraction for the phonation part of the sound, whether it be different exercises releasing on SHs or different consonants. But really trying to get the brain back into, I always say put your brain in your belly, because sometimes that's really what you need to think about entirely in as a singer. So moving into breath exercises or breath work. After that, I start with simple phonation. So something that is that I like to use are slides. Sometimes like from the fifth to the root, moving up in half steps on either an oo or an easy vowel, maybe sometimes an e, but always starting with a consonant to make sure that there's air happening first. So that kind of concept, so that it's easy singing, it's simple phonation, but it's connection of breath to that production of sound. And then I moved to articulators. So things using the lips, tongue, tip of the teeth kind of thing. You can do tongue twisters. You can do rhythmic consonants back and forth. You can make up different, um, making up different things is always great. Sometimes I look at, if I have a piece that I'm teaching that is particularly if it's rhythmic or if it has some language challenges, I will try to use what I see in the music and put that into something that I create for my articulator exercises. For example, if there's a strong K that I'm looking for, we just sang something called Hold Me, Rock Me at VBC. I wanted a K in there. Hold me, rock me. I wanted that K in there. So I added some K type exercises within my articulating what I was at at least the vocal uses that we were using with the articulators. You can use different words from your music, or you can just use nonsense syllables too. And then I move into range. So specifically moving into that higher range, keeping things open and whatnot, but moving up first, opening that upper head voice and possibly even falsetto for our tenors and basses. Um, and then moving into the lower registers for especially altos and basses, but keeping that in that forward placement. So you've established all of that space and lift, and then you move into some of the more weighted singing. I find a lot more difficult to remove weight if you haven't established that head voice placement first. So starting from the top down, that's why I ascend first in range and then and then go into the lower ranges afterwards. And that can be done on simple exercises too. I usually tell people not to get too complicated with your warm-up exercises. It really can be something as simple as 5 notes. I get stuck using the same things all the time, because I like what I like. But it is good to change it up, even if it's the same pattern of notes that you're changing different syllables, perhaps changing or adding words. Extensions are what I refer to as anything that uses like an octave within the range of the actual vocalies. So arpeggios or different expanding like scalar passages, that would be what I consider extensions, because now we've gone from sort of just simple muscle function to more of that particular really, I mean, you're warming up a muscle like anything else. You don't immediately dive into a sprint. Most runners have to slow jog, warm up the muscles, do some stretching, and then they jump into it. But you're going from that just warming the muscle into those more specific movements that are, or more specific skills that are needed. And then I go back into articulations, but articulations that are specific to things in the music. So if there's a legato staccato somewhere, or a very specific connection of phrase, I'm going to go more big picture with those articulations versus the smaller articulators I did before with different like lips, tongue twisters, all of that. The articulations that I'll do later have more to do with the musical phrasing. So we're looking at longer lines and more extended skills versus the smaller, quick things that we do at the beginning of warm-ups. And then in particular with choral, warm-ups, moving then into some tuning and some ensemble work, because yes, we want our singers to be awake and engaged and physically ready to go, mentally in it, but they also not only have to be sure their own instrument is ready, but that they're in tune with what's happening around them, not necessarily, trying to change to be like someone else, but that they're cognizant of what's going on. And there's then the beginning of that group collaboration in the sound that's being created. Right? So moving on, I talked a lot about them in between, but these are specific things that I put in for each category. So physically engaging, stretching, blood flow, alleviating tension in particular. Sometimes, a lot of times, my instrumental friends joke that choir people always want to give each other back rubs and sing sighs. But anything that you can do to alleviate tension in the body is really helpful, especially with the voice. Any tension is going to be a difficult rehearsal ahead of you. So stretching, moving things around, loosening up as best you can. Mentally engaging, I mentioned this earlier, but focus and directed energy so that it's really easy to just sort of lose people, and everybody's attention is different places, and we have to bring them back to us as the teacher or conductor or director to really sort of get that focus back into the task at hand. Breath is that coordination of muscle movement, the flow and continuation of air, and then that control of support, whether it's fast, slow, pulsed, etc. The simple phonation, I mentioned this also, connection of breath with phonation, so that using the breath to start the sound, making sure that there is connection to the breath and the sound, using slides, onsets with consonants versus vowels. That can be a really good way to start the rehearsal by using a consonant to start the sound, or then starting with just a vowel, because that's a different ability to start the air. The consonants can help lead into the breath, whereas just starting on a vowel can run the risk of glottal attacks and things like that. And so moving through those can be really helpful. And keeping all of that with small ranges and forward vowels just to set up that really healthy production of sound. Articulators, I talked about that. I used to have a goat sound bite in here, but I took it out. So anyway. Fun times. Tongue twisters, lip trills, facial muscles, all that stuff. Articulators in there. Range, I mentioned this up first, ascending in range, then down, open vowel for highs and a forward vowel for lows. And then I touched on this briefly, but it really is important to keep, especially like the tenors and basses who have no changed voices yet, to keep them singing as high as possible for as long as possible, to just let that expansiveness not become scary or foreign. And it's when we don't access that range that it becomes sort of this faux pas or this like scary place. And the more that we can keep that a part of them, even in older groups, sometimes we'll add some falsetto work if we need to. But that's just important to keep that expansion for all of your singers. Extensions, the connection of breath and energy with intonation, the larger ranges of phrases, whether it be arpeggios or scalar patterns, moving into sort of the bigger parts of phrasing. Articulations, I should say, the fast-moving melismas or patterns, staccato versus legato, phrasing within the music that you're about to look at. And then, of course, tuning the ensemble, vowel unification, listening, and then ensemble work. Movement together, nonverbal communication, listening skills, all of that is just really important to establish in the rehearsal. And all of these things that you look at within that structure of warm-ups, they all should be geared towards what you're hoping to achieve in your rehearsal. So if you're doing something, let's say that is like, let's say you're doing Palestrina, which is beautiful long lines that are not meant to have crazy vowel sound differences. It's all meant to be in that like sleeve of sound, or that color, that timbre that is not extremes. You're probably going to want to use more vowels, like an oo or an o or a warm color to it throughout your warm up, because that's the desired effect that you want from the music that you're working on. So it's important that you have that in mind as you're looking at the warm ups that you're doing. They really should not be totally disjunct. I think there's nothing weirder than doing all kinds of crazy, outlandish warm-ups and then trying to go sing something that's very somber and and really kind of intensely focused. You really want stuff to match a little bit, at least to set people up for what's expected of them the rest of the rehearsal. So other things to consider when it comes to warm-ups too is the time of day, your top type of ensemble, and then the musical needs. I've already talked about the musical needs or desired outcomes with how you're gonna choose what you're gonna warm up with. Time of day I think is really important. If you have a night rehearsal, your singers are vocally warm. They've been talking all day. They don't need to warm up the muscle itself. They need to be ready to sing. So the warm-ups should be more geared towards that singing mindset versus just warming up the muscle. It's the connection of breath, the release of tension, vowel shape, all of that, and doesn't need to be nearly as extensive. Your type of ensemble too. Some ensembles can keep that focus right off the bat to do nitpicky niche work in a warm up. But others, when I was teaching middle school, I was just happy to have them singing and not like touching each other or hurting each other or shoving somebody off the risers. You just want them to be engaged in the music. And so gearing things towards that mindset is also going to be really important in the way that you look at your warm-up structure, which really sets up the entire rest of the rehearsal. So that's the end of that. Let me get out of this really quick. So I think with the warm-up structure, it really lends itself to kind of giving you that bigger picture of what your rehearsal is going to look like. And even though it seems like maybe there's a lot that I'm trying to figure out for every rehearsal, it starts to get faster and faster. I know for me, when I was first teaching, I used to memorize my lesson plans so that I didn't lose focus myself and that I didn't leave time for my students to disengage. It doesn't matter the age that I've taught, I've often felt that that is the most successful rehearsals I have when I don't allow my the people that I'm making music with to disengage at all. It doesn't mean necessarily going super, 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 super fast, but that you're always asking them to do something and that the main focus is singing and not talking about things. So what I encourage people to do in structuring rehearsals is spending some time when you first start in a new place or in a rehearsal or rehearsing a group, that you spend time to structure your warm-ups that then lead to the structure of your overall rehearsal. But then as you move through that, it can change and it can be more easily adapted to wherever you're at any given time because you've established that structure. Let's see. I lost my train of thought for just a second. But I guess at this point I probably could really open it up to questions if anybody has any questions so far. I've kind of just talked a lot, but does anybody have anything that they're interested about or not didn't make sense in that so far?
I think there was one question in the chat. It says, how long would you say is an ideal time for the entire warm up?
That's a great question. Um, I don't think that a warm-up should be for sure any longer than 10 minutes. Um, Generally speaking, I think 7 to 8 is a really good time frame. That also goes into account thinking about time of day. We just did something that had a really high soprano range, and so for a morning rehearsal, I spent some more time doing a warm-up because they needed that time physically to warm it up. But in a regular class, or a rehearsal, 7 to 8 minutes. Otherwise, you really start to get people, well, my younger students would lose interest unless it was fun games and activities, or and then my older groups now, they want to work on the music, and your number one teaching tool is that repertoire. So 10 minutes at the absolute max is what I would say. Good question. Anybody else?
I'm an instrumentalist
Yeah.
and I'm a recent graduate, so I am actually teaching choir right now. Um, and what do you mean when you say forward vowels versus I can't even remember the other type of vowel.
So a lot of times we have forward and closed vowels is sometimes usually how I refer to them. So a forward vowel is going to be like an E or an A. because it keeps it the forward placement. The mask of your face is a really important part of that forward placement. So E, A, um, versus A, O, U tend to be more covered or backwards in the placement within the face. And so the connection to that forward vowel is really great for connection of breath to placement so that there's no stop in the breath, that it's an organic start to the sound. Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Good question. And congratulations. I most of us never think that we're going to teach the others, and then we do.
I teach them all. I teach band, orchestra, choir, and general music.
Oh, bless you. Bless you. That's awesome. What was I gonna say? Well, something just popped into my brain. I think the thing with rehearsal structure is the being willing to be flexible with what you're hearing in real time, as opposed to having or to using only pre-prescribed things, which is a little bit obviously it kind of counteracts what I just said about like you should have a plan. Uh, but you should have a plan that you are able to also adjust and be flexible with because you really do want to react to what you're hearing in real time. And sometimes that means we're going to spend more time on this 8 measure phrase or whatever it is because I need to make sure you can sing the notes. And then I'm going to go from there. It all has to give and balance. And sometimes you have to let something go that's not fixed because we're just not in a place where it's going to happen today and know when to move on. Um, but the idea is that you have a structure and then you also know that you're critically thinking enough to be able to react and adjust in real time. And that's both musically, but also with what your students need. We're all we've all been in groups before where the just the energy is off sometimes, or just or maybe it's super intense, or maybe it's really down. You have to also, I think, read the room in that way because there are times where it the more you push something, it's going to turn into an unsuccessful thing versus a positive thing. And readjusting in that vein as well, I think is really important. Is that a hand?
Yes, this is a
Hi.
hand. Hi. So this is a question, maybe a little less about just the rehearsal process and more just a general question for choir. But I currently play piano for a choir, and it was actually the choir I was in high school. And I was just curious. So the ensemble, it has a very like mixed degree of music theory knowledge. Like some are very, very knowledgeable about music theory and can read music, and some have no experience whatsoever with reading music. And like, how do you go about that in a choir rehearsal? Kind of like, do you teach everyone music theory, or do you just like, you know, have everyone learn by rote method? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Uh, that's a great question, and probably one of the hard parts about teaching choral rehearsals because I mean, not to it, we all know this. There are a lot of singers who don't learn to read music until they go to a certain place or never do at all, depending on their level of amateur or whatnot. And you don't necessarily have to know all of the music theory things in order to be able to sing. So it is a toss up between trying to bridge that gap between those who read and who don't. And that's where I think that you have to decide, you have to choose repertoire that allows you to do both, in my opinion. So I do think there's always such a bad connotation around the term rote teaching. Um, but I don't think it's all bad. Students are able to experience things that they can't maybe yet sight read or look at or see, but that doesn't mean that they can't be a part of that music making, right? So there is a level to which we do some rote teaching to get them singing. And then you choose other things along the way that maybe you're insisting that they solfege first, because maybe it is a simpler pattern within that. And then in the rote teaching, you have those who read music who are leading those who don't. And then you're kind of trying to bring up to speed that whole sort of, I mean, I always tell people that cheating in sight reading is not necessarily the worst thing in terms of singing together as a group, not on your individual tests. But because you're listening to people and you're going with them versus not listening at all and trying to just figure it out on your own. You working together, and so they feed off of each other, those two different types or skill levels, if you will. So I think it can't be black and white with like, I only teach using solfege or counting rhythms or whatever. It has to be a little bit of both. Because if you don't give if you don't give them something to just sing or do, you're going to lose some of those kids who are just lost with music theory. But if you give them the opportunity to experience it, and then eventually maybe they see something they experienced on a page and it starts to transfer. It's a little bit of that concept of like, if you've ever studied Suzuki learning, where you experience it first and then it transfers into the written reading of sight music or of sheet music. It's that kind of concept in a smaller kind of framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. That's kind of the gist of what I had. If anybody doesn't have any questions, I'm a little short, but I talk fast. So, oh, rhythm exercises. Yeah. I do in terms of rhythm. If there are like syncopated passages in the music, you do it with consonants like sh, sh, t, t, k, and they repeat back to you, just getting those rhythms, letting them experience them just muscly. They can repeat back to you. That's some of the rote call, pair, share type stuff that I think is really helpful. And you can use different consonants, different rhythmic patterns. The rhythm canon I like is where the teacher or conductor is always first, four counts off separately, and you're starting the next thing and they're always four counts behind you, and you just keep going through rhythm cycles. It's that mental game that we play sometimes with our students, trying to get them focused. And then even sometimes just following what I do with conducting patterns or different physical things with my hands or more my feet, depending on what the group is willing to do.
If this makes sense, how do you know when to go from teaching the music to conducting the music?
That's a great question. Um, gosh, I think I still struggle honestly with this one because the control freak in me is like, well, just make sure you know this part. Just I'm gonna help you a little bit still. Versus taking a step back and just doing the conducting part to let them experience it and figure it out on their own. Um, uh, because we want them to succeed so much, sometimes we have to force ourselves to step back a little bit. So I think in terms of teaching versus conducting, I think you do have to go. It's not a it's not a one or the other kind of thing. Like let's say there's a melody that we're learning and that you're teaching them. You sing it and you reinforce with piano if you need to. And then maybe you try it one more time and then we try it a cappella a little bit. And maybe I'm not conducting necessarily. Maybe I'm just giving one or two pitches in between and we're just moving breath and sound together. And then the next class you may have to start with that review again, but you're moving quicker into just conducting versus like teaching. I think you can go back and forth, and not everything has to be immediately perfect for them to get through it. I think that we send sometimes to nitpick too much versus letting them get the bigger picture and then going back into it. So you kind of have to find a flow with that, to be honest. But I think it's good to go to the conducting part sooner than later.
Hi, another question.
Yeah.
Um, so I also referring to the choir that I work for. These are just things I've noticed and I've always wondered about. So when you said choosing rep, when choosing rep, how do you deal with choosing rep that is like, so if some people are Jewish and some people are Christian, and how do you choose rep that makes everyone feel comfortable and included? Because I've noticed that some of these students, especially the Jewish students, are feel maybe a little uncomfortable singing about, things that relate to church or Christianity. And so I guess, have you had experiences with students who have felt uncomfortable, and how have you dealt with that?
That's a great question. And it is a difficult thing. You kind of have to know, like, it's for me it's changed in whatever community I've been teaching in. But when I was teaching, sorry, we're safe. It's okay. Um, when I was teaching high school, I had to be much more cognizant in the area that I was in because public school separation of church and state. So you can you have to be careful what you choose that's anything related to sacred music that doesn't have a historical context that you can make sure is correct. So, there's a difference between like church anthems and then historically sacred music. But then it's also, if you're going to do music like that, you really also need to be including music across the board. So here's kind of more a direct answer to your question. One, I think there's a lot. Sorry. Um, uh, Okay. There's a lot of great new repertoire out now. We have so many composers that are using secular texts that have at least many different inclusions in them. I think there's some great repertoire out there. And I work for a publisher right now called Pavan Publishing. But I know like J.W. Pepper also, you can search for things that are non-denominational, not completely secular, but that still go towards the same meanings. And just in kind of knowing your community and your audience. Also, I think what's important is if you are going to represent some of these, let's say it is sacred, but you're doing it because it's this beautiful Palestrina motet, or I keep saying Palestrina, but or you're doing something that is Russian Orthodox, that Rachmaninoff, that has that. I mean, it is sacred, but it's not necessarily meant for that sacred purpose. If you're going to do that, make sure then that you are diversifying your repertoire so that you're including as many different things as possible. I don't think that with inclusion, I don't think that we should stay away from things completely. I think we need to make sure that we are inclusive of all of it. And then you still may have some singers that aren't comfortable with certain things. And there, I mean, I have a lot of I've had Jehovah's Witness students before, things like that. And if there's a song that they're not comfortable with, I'm fine if they step off stage and don't sing that one, if that's not something they're comfortable with.
Thank you.
Welcome. I think there's one more in the chat that asked about selecting repertoire. Middle school is hard, but there are some really great pieces that are like SAB or for changing voices. A lot of great resources through CCDA, California Community, or sorry, California Choral Directors Association. There's a lot of whether it's through specific websites, but I'd be happy to put together a few things and maybe I can forward this on to Sarah for repertoire, just places to look. And the best thing that you can do is just keep looking for new repertoire, keep searching through stuff. It can be kind of monotonous at times, but there's lots of great new rep and a lot of people who are actively trying to write for choirs for that are applicable, middle school, etc. But I think you have to also, if you're choosing repertoire, even if it is simple or for a tiny group, even if it's like not necessarily the most musically challenging, that you still like it, because as you're teaching it, you have to sell it to your students. And if you don't like it, they're not going to like it. Or that if you think it's cheesy, they're going to think it's cheesy. They're going to tell. I hope that answers a little bit, but I'll try to get some more resources too. Okay, it says, what sort of student leadership positions do you include in your ensembles? Musical or logistical responsibilities do they take on? Student leadership is so important and it's also really difficult. I know at the community college that I'm at, or just in general, that's been difficult for me to find ways to implement systems of student leadership, partially because of the transient nature of community college. And so it kind of just becomes like students that are returning and you lean on those who can help mentor others and things like that. But I know, especially when I was teaching high school, student leadership was really just crucial to being able to survive sometimes. And there are great resources. There's a man named Dr. Tim Leudenheitzer. Again, with resources I'll find. I'm gonna make up a name that's completely mispronounced right now. But I will forward those on, and it's just great team building things that help strengthen and identify student leaders. And I was the kind of student who, like, I hated icebreakers. I hated that stuff. I was the angry one in the back who would like roll my eyes if we had to do team building things. But it as a teacher, seeing what it does to create that connection between your students and you, even if it's silly, I think it's really important to do that, because then you start to see who naturally has certain leadership tendencies, maybe also those who have the tendencies but probably aren't the right choice of leaders. And the student leaders can do everything that everything from like music librarians to just community and engagement, help with decorations, all that stuff. So it really would make your life so much easier. And in terms of musical or logistical responsibilities, letting go of some of that control, letting student leadership run sectionals, run rehearsals in your absence. I can say it's been really a good thing for me to learn. It's been hard to let go, but if I'm not feeling well, not killing myself and having section leaders, run rehearsal and see what happens. And I've seen a lot of folks step up to the plate by giving them a lot of responsibility.
I do have one more question. How do you assess like students in choir? I feel like in band it's pretty easy to tell, if someone's playing a wrong note or, not playing their part. But, as someone who's in choir, I feel like even sometimes when I was like, I don't really know this part, like I'll just like kind of lip sync or um, go really quiet. So how do you assess people and make sure they know their parts?
Um, that's a great question. And you also have to, like, depending on like the type of group that you're in, there are like our community Master Arts Chorale. There are people in there that I think sing maybe half the time, but they love it and they love their community in there. So like I'm not looking to part test some of those groups, but as long as I see that folks are engaged and actively participating on a regular basis, that's like a general sort of thing that I do. I used to, when it came to like part checks, I've done different things now. Like I would rather have folks sing in quartets and octets, so maybe they're not quite so exposed or feeling such pressure. Or the other thing that I've learned, and I have never used this, but I have like my friends who still teach in the high school, secondary arena. Um, lots of most of the kids have smartphones, right? That you can do part testing of them singing in immediate, like right into their phone, and then immediately uploading it to a Google Drive during the choral rehearsal, so that it doesn't take like individual testing time, but that microphone is right there. So whatever they're singing is either going to be in the chord or not. That the teacher can go back through and hear. And you don't have to listen to everything, but you could like spot check and see, especially if you think someone's lost, and maybe treating it more as a chance to help versus like who's wrong and who's right. I don't know.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What age do you think it's good to start including like world music? Because I know we did a lot of like foreign languages and stuff, and I know that probably as you start younger, it's easier to learn diction and IPA and whatnot. So, like, when do you think's a good age to start doing just little things here and there?
uh, Kind of what you just said. The earlier the better. There are some awesome simple, like I'm thinking of all of the different styles of various African music that has even just some simple harmonies, syllables. Kids can, they they're such like mirrors of people as they learn and as they develop, and so they just sponge. They're like a sponge to any of those kind of syllables and phrases. And so I mean, even something as simple as that tune, like I remember learning Sia Hamba, that would have been early elementary school. I would say if you find something that is musically accessible for them in terms of range and just whether it's rhythm or whatever else, those kids can definitely learn that at a young age. I mean, as early as like elementary, for sure.
I also have a question. So I'm also an instrumentalist, and I know in our rehearsals, if our director needs to work directly with like a whole section, there's ways for the rest of us to like, silently without disrupting rehearsals, like go over like technically difficult passages just with like finger rings and stuff like that. Is there anything similar for vocalists to do? And if there's not, does that impact the amount of time you're able to work with like a whole section in rehearsal or anything like that?
I love that question because I think like so here's what I do. Anyway, a lot of times I remember being in rehearsals and just feeling like, okay, I just have to sit here until it's my turn. Cool, cool, cool. But especially as you're encouraging your students to be independent, and teaching things like sight singing and like oral skills. I use and I try to build it into different things that I do in warm-ups, but I use this term audiation a lot in my choral rehearsals. So if I'm working with, let's say, like sopranos and tenors, I say to basses and altos in this section, I need you to audiate while we're doing this, but tenors and sopranos are singing. And so the audiation process as a singer is you are with your music, you're in it, and you are doing everything that you would be doing if you were singing in terms of that placement of feeling of breath and like pretending to sing, but not actually making sound. And there's a lot actually that you can gain out of doing that and learning the part, or at least trying to hear it before really making sure that you know what's happening. And so that's sort of something that I do. It's not always a fail safe because you can't really tell if students are still working. I mean, they're not fingering things. They're not, they're holding their music, hopefully, and looking at it, or hopefully not their cell phones. But anyway, it depends. But I think that that's a tool that I use in terms of teaching and then enforcing or talking about audiation all the time, because that ear to sound placement connection is so important. And then you're also helping them. I mean, if you're sight reading something in performance as a singer, you got to kind of hope that you're guessing correctly as you sing. So I think it aids in that skill that way. That's the kind of idea that I use, but then also it really, you do have to gauge how long you are with a certain section, because you don't want to totally have the other people disengage. So maybe probably a little bit less individual time, um, but you can still do that quickly. You can identify something that's happening in one voice and then build it back in by, okay, now let's have two voices together. Okay, now let's have three voices, and there, so on and so on, all the while talking about audiation in the other groups. So it's a great question.
I have another question. How do you give criticism to vocalists in a constructive yet a positive way for them to understand? Because I know, because it's an internal instrument, it's really hard to give criticism. Unlike like being an instrumentalist, you can just tell them, "Oh, put your finger down," and then the note's fixed. But for voice, it's very hard. So how do you deal with that?
Great question. Because we get in our own ways because it feels so personal when you get any kind of feedback. So the first important thing is to create an environment in your, whether it be private lessons or in the rehearsals, that we can all make mistakes and we all move forward. And so I personally am really open about making mistakes. Like, well, that's me. I did that. Let's go back, guys. I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying that you messed up and trying again. And we are the people that demonstrate that for our students. So right off the bat, establishing that is something that happens in your classroom or your studio, and that it, all of us are going to do those things, making weird noises or making mistakes. And so then when it comes to individual feedback, I think one, it's always important to start with something that's positive in reinforcing that it's okay. Whatever it is that you just did is fine. We're going to work with it and we're going to move forward. So starting with something that is positive is usually, it sort of alleviates that anxiety level after finishing a phrase or finishing a piece of a singer, of like, oh my gosh, is it okay? Was that okay? Yes, it was okay. Let's talk about what happened that was great, and then let's move into something that's constructive. And then also, when you give constructive criticism, giving a solution to the criticism is also really important, because you want folks to feel like they have the ability to change or to improve what you've asked them to improve. And I think that you have to tread lightly with some folks, and some students you'll learn quickly, can handle more than others. Um, and sometimes it's a day-to-day thing too. Like you can tell kind of usually by people's energy when they walk in the room, if they're just in a place to be able to be there for that today. It's sort of like if you ask your friends ever, like, hey, can you listen to me that for a second? Do you have space for that today? Same kind of thing in the choral vocal lesson, in my opinion. It's a hard line to walk though, because we do have to be, it's our job to be critical and to help students make changes and grow and be better musicians. Um, so it's our responsibility to give them this feedback, but it can be really hard to relay in a way that people can receive it. So that's a great question. Uh, that's kind of my thought process, but there is no there's no perfect way. Oh, what are some strategies for kiddos who can't for the life of them match pitch? Oh, you will probably always have one or two somewhere every year that float. And I, depending on the age or depending on the energy, there are times where I won't let it bother me to give them the experience of just being a part of it. I know I've used the phrase a lot, like I need less Mallory in this sound. For example, a student that just I'll say like, oh, it's so much, no, so much sound, we just need a little less. But then when it comes to actually matching pitch, at the older age level, where I'm at right now in community college, I find that it's actually way more beneficial to let the section help with that person, because that collective nature, especially for me, like with basses and tenors, it's like they have that I don't know, secret handshake or something that allows them to feel comfortable around each other to make weird noises and like they help each other out in that way. So I use student models often. And then when it comes to like younger kids, sliding in between pitches is actually really helpful. So like if they're, the pitch is here and they're or over and down, also sliding around the pitches helps them to try to access different things. And then also making sounds like this or other weird voices to get them to experience that head voice feel, to be free to not control or constrict what they're doing. Um, oh, so Garrett asked, how do you address students as a whole if they're unprepared repertoire like they were assigned to practice, and it wasn't acceptable given the circumstances? So, I'm careful how often I do that, but I do like to do part checks. And I think you put them in places where they would have, like, there would have to be something wrong for them not to feel or notice or have others notice that they weren't prepared. So like in a quartet octet thing, if uh like the tenor just drops out completely, it's clear to everybody that person didn't know. And it's not necessarily about putting them it's not about putting them on display, but allowing them to like kind of understand the repercussions of what not learning something is. But then I also am positive in the lead up to those kind of like quizzes or tests, in that way of like, if you're struggling with this phrase or this portion section, now is the time to ask questions. Now is the time to reach out to your section leader, preemptively doing that so that you're giving them as many tools. And you're still going to have students who kind of just don't. And if that's the case, I would address it separately, individually first. Most people react defensively when you call them out in front of folks. So talking individually first and seeing if they're like asking that question of like, how are you? Or usually there's like underlying things too, coming from a place of caring. But you can go to the individual if you continue to notice a pattern. That's like my trajectory. Sorry, that was a lot of stuff. Anyway.
All right, so again, since it is 6 p.m. now, this is the end of our scheduled clinic, but everyone please thank Dr. Miskell very much for taking her time to share all of this really lovely information with us. It's definitely very, very helpful. So thank you all, or thank you once again, and thank you all for joining this meeting on a Friday. I know it's late and it's been a long week for us, but anyway, I'll repost the check-in link again in case anybody missed it. But until then, take care, you all, and have a great weekend. Thank you once again, Dr. Miskell, and
Thanks,
I'll see you
guys.
all next week.
Thank you, Dr. Miskell.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.